So we've got somatic skills educator, and then we also have relationship skills coach. What I find interesting on this is this pairing up of the words somatic and skills, relationship and skills. So I'm seeing already this balancing, this having both things, something that is more what I'll call energetic and something that also looks a little more like a checklist. So skill looks like a checklist. Somatic and relationship is more on the energetic side. Is this how you work? Am I onto something here in the way that's described?
I kind of like that. Yeah, I don't know that I've ever quite thought about it in that capacity, but absolutely, because it is absolutely energetics. It is absolutely mindset. But the skills portion of it is really when I'm working, particularly with clients one-on-one or when I'm doing group settings, it's really about giving people tangible things to hold on to of like, okay, because I have a little bit of a background with mental health where it's a lot, we talk about the problems, we talk about the traumas, we talk about, but what do I do about it, right? Like, how do I make it different? How do I show up differently in my relationships? Okay, so I know why I'm doing this, but how do I actually show up differently? And that's where like the relational or interpersonal part, I think, combines so well with the somatic part, because the somatic part is helping us that embodied, right, of understanding what we do and why we do it, but then more so how to listen, how to drop in, how to understand what's happening in real time in our nervous system, so that we are learning how to get in front of the tendencies that we have to fall into old stories and old scripts or autopilot reaction. I have to react.
Welcome to the Mindfulness in Motion podcast, the show that helps you move beyond the checklist of life and into a world of joy and meaning and discovery. I'm your host, Cori Myka, and I'm excited to have our listeners here with us today. Today in this episode, we're talking with Andrea. Andrea, I forgot to check that before we went on. Which way? Andrea, thank you. Andrea, who's a somatic skills educator, a mental health practitioner, relationship skills coach, and about how embodied awareness and mindful movement can help us build confidence, emotional resilience, and a deeper trust with ourselves. I love that. It's what always comes back to, a deeper trust with ourselves. So whether you're navigating a major life transition, working through self-doubt, or simply looking for new ways to feel more connected to yourself, this conversation is for you. Let's dive in. So welcome, Andrea.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here and have this meaningful, rich conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to say in that mindfulness in motion thing, I can hear my brain already chattering and doubting which way I'm going to say your name. It's said two different ways. I'm just going to go with it, and I'm going to say it the right way, and you can correct me if I
honestly, it won't offend me however you say it, because I have family. I have a story about where my name origin, and I accept different pronunciations. So as long as you're close, I'm happy.
Okay. All right. That's great. Yeah.
Call me Angie. I'll probably correct you.
Oh, I won't go there. Okay. Don't say. Good to know. Good to know. This is, I'm going to ask you another question here, but it's just really occurring to me, right? The whole reason for this podcast is mindfulness in motion. And so I'm displaying it right here. I have spelling is not easy for me. After having my kid diagnosed with dyslexia, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's probably was my thing. So it's this old narrative I have around words that get me in the way of just being present. And so I appreciate being able to name it, and I will get to practice, and the audience will get to watch me practice, just taking a mindful moment to let that go. Yeah.
Yeah, I've said often that I never would have made it through my PhD if it wasn't for spell check, because spelling has never been a strong point for me. But it's all about strengths and weaknesses, right? We all have certain things that we excel at and other things that we're always probably going to struggle with, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that.
Yeah. My struggle now is not so much the spelling. I mean, is what it is. It's the old narrative that still creeps up around it. That's where the actual struggle is.
Interesting. Yeah.
We have
stories we tell ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's dive into you. So I want to start with, we've got somatic skills educator, and then we also have relationship skills coach. What I find interesting on this is this pairing up of the words somatic and skills, relationship and skills. So I'm seeing already this balancing, this having both things, something that is more what I'll call energetic and something that also looks a little more like a checklist. A skill looks like a checklist. Somatic and relationship is more on the energetic side. Is this how you work? Am I onto something here in the way that's described?
I kind of like that. Yeah, I don't know that I've ever quite thought about it in that capacity, but absolutely, because it is absolutely energetics. It is absolutely mindset. But the skills portion of it is really when I'm working, particularly with clients one-on-one or when I'm doing group settings, it's really about giving people tangible things to hold on to of like, okay, because I have a little bit of a background with mental health where it's a lot, we talk about the problems, we talk about the traumas, we talk about, but what do I do about it, right? Like, how do I make it different? How do I show up differently in my relationships? Okay, so I know why I'm doing this, but how do I actually show up differently? And that's where like the relational or interpersonal part, I think, combines so well with the somatic part, because the somatic part is helping us that embodied, right, of understanding what we do and why we do it, but then more so how to listen, how to drop in, how to understand what's happening in real time in our nervous system, so that we are learning how to get in front of the tendencies that we have to fall into old stories and old scripts or autopilot reaction. I have to react. Oh, I see a red shirt and that makes me go, rah, because something bad happened when somebody was wearing a red shirt. Or every time my partner says XYZ, it takes me back to a place in my childhood or a previous relationship or earlier in our relationship, and then I react. And when we go to that place of reactivity, when your nervous system is in that fight or flight response, whether it's shutting down or whether it's wanting to fight, we're not showing up as our best selves. We're not using our, all of our brain. We're not able to have logic and reason and use the skills then that we could say for healthy communication or holding healthy boundaries and those types of things. The somatic part comes in because it's helping us integrate action and feeling. It's helping us understand emotions from a deeper place. It's helping us understand why we do what we do from a place that allows us to validate it, but also hold deep accountability for showing up more effectively, rather than just letting ourselves kind of make excuses. Well, this is just how I've always been, sort of a narrative that happens. Well, I've just always been like that. And I'm like, yeah, I can, so let's look back at the origin story maybe and see where that core belief or that behavior, came from. But also it's okay to say, this is how I've always been, meaning I learned early and adapted to survival based on what I had and what I needed. And great, you survived, but is it effective now? Is it helping you get the results that you want and the quality of the life that you want and the quality of the relationship that you want? And if not, let's rewire those neural pathways. Let's learn how to show up differently so that we can show up as our best self, so that we can thrive, not just in relationship, but in ourself and our well-being, in how we see and view ourselves.
Absolutely. So as you're saying all this, I'm thinking, gosh, it is really just perfect that I had this, I'll say, instability around your name, right? And that narrative. And that we went through that process of naming that old thing. I could feel it in my body. I could feel the tension in my body of anxiety around them. Then say it wrong. And now that I thought about it, then I'm going to go back and forth with it, right? So then you said a key thing here that I'd like you to go into a little bit more, because it's something that we maybe hear, but flesh it out, maybe give an example of how it's actually done, where you said we help people drop down into their bodies. And this is something certainly what I needed to do around this narrative. I'll just keep using this example of reading something and pronouncing something correctly. And for our listeners, right, you've got something else that strikes up that you're in the face of. You said a red shirt or, something that makes us kind of seize up a little bit. So then what does it mean to drop down? What does that look like?
Right. So we have been, I would say, socialized historically for quite a few generations, encouraged, right? It's not an accident, but very systemically intended to keep us sort of disconnected from our own corporal reality. We have been encouraged to minimize, to distract, to avoid, to overthink and overproduce and not actually drop in and pay attention to what's happening in our body and our nervous system. But the truth is, your body is wise and your body knows what it needs, and it's constantly scanning, not just with visual and verbal sensory input, but all of your nervous system is constantly scanning for safety. And it's always communicating to you what it needs and what is going to help it be successful. But we have been taught to ignore it. We've been taught to avoid basic biological needs, even in terms of like professionals not allowing themselves to go to the bathroom when they need to, or not being able to take a drink of water or feed themselves appropriately, like really simple, basic things. We hold our breath in, and I know breath work is almost cliched as like, oh, my therapist told me I need to breathe. That's not going to help. But in reality, when you think about breath is life, like we need oxygen to survive, and we hold our breath and we're not breathing effectively, and we're not giving our body the nutrition that it needs, the hydration that it needs, the rest that it needs, or the movement that it needs. And yet, if we slow down and we learn how to tune in, we can start to pay attention to when we feel that tension, when we feel the oftentimes it's used in a color code of like, green is happy and everything's stable, and then we go into yellow, and yellow's a little bit like a little prickly, and then we go into orange, and now we're really kind of activated, and then red is when the lid is flipped and now we're being reactive. It's when you can start to pay attention when you're just coming out of that green area, or maybe you're dropping maybe down into a blue, because blue would be more of that depressed, sort of shut down. It's starting to recognize that there's always clues. There's cues and somatic markers that your body is giving you that's letting you know, hey, I'm not comfortable. Hey, I don't like that. Hey, this doesn't feel safe for me, right? Because our brain doesn't know the difference between imagined stress or imagined fear versus real time. So if you're telling yourself that you're not safe, or like, oh, I'm going to mess this word up, or oh my gosh, and the story that you start to go through is impacting your nervous system in a way that's now causing it to be more reactive. So when you can start to catch and go, oh, something doesn't feel right about this, and now you've been practicing those skills or the tools of like, okay, what do I need to do in this moment to drop in and to pay attention to what I'm feeling? Oh, I'm feeling that knot, that butterfly in my stomach, or that tension in my shoulders. And I'm like, oh, wow, I'm up here. And I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? I need to take a deep breath. I need to drink, my mouth is dry. I need to drink water. I'm hot. I'm going to take off a layer. I'm cold. I'm going to put like really simple biological needs. Just paying attention to that can be such a beginning, like foundational piece to start being able to show up more effectively with our emotions and the big feelings as they're coming on. And
so dropping down. So what I'm hearing from you is dropping down is about feeling.
Sensations and emotions. It's noticing and recognizing the sensations that are happening in your nervous system or in your body in real time, and not discrediting it or discounting it, but really dropping down to paying attention to what's happening. Whether it's the fact that my feet are tingling, or my palms are sweating, or my heart is, palpitating. Like one of my nervous system cues that is super not great, but like anytime I'm doing anything that's remotely stressful, my armpits immediately start to sweat. My whole somatic journey started with martial arts, and every time we'd sit down, we would do what's called seiza, where you'd go into this warrior like kind of posture, and he'd ring this bell gong, and immediately I would just start to perspire, and it was ridiculous. And it's funny, even now, years later, anytime I'm in a semi-stressful situation, I always know my nervous system is a little heightened because I can feel it in my armpits, and I'm like, this is so not like cool, like knock it off, body. But I already know too, because I know that that's one of my tells. I know how to like kind of compensate for that, and I can also catch it and be like, we're fine, and give myself that mental imagery or the self-talk and the breath work and the skills that I need to like drop down and not let it, continue to rise up here to where now I'm out of sorts, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay, so what I love there is when you said it's my tell. And I think that is a very nice way of speaking about it. Because I hear all the time, you mentioned breath work, and people said, I don't know how to breathe, or people don't breathe, or people, as a swim instructor, right, I teach adults how to overcome fear in water. So I do this somatic work in the water. And I tell people all the time, we know how to breathe. To be able to be telling yourself you don't know how to breathe is not useful. If you didn't know how to breathe, because in my world, if you don't know how to breathe, you can't have air, you're dead. So if you're alive, you know how to breathe. But to be able to say it in the way of saying, oh, it's my tell when I'm holding my breath. My tell is a softer way of saying, oh, look at me. I just noticed I did start that first step of dropping into my body, which was to
Yes.
notice that my tell is activated. Great.
Yeah.
Bravo. Now we can be curious and pull up whatever tools that we want to implement. But if we don't even notice those sweaty armpits or the breath holding,
Exactly. Yeah. Then it tends to escalate, because what happens is your body whispers at first, and then it gets louder and it ups the ante, and eventually it's shouting at you, and eventually it's going to knock you right on your butt if to make sure that its needs are being met, whether that's through injury or illness or mental distress or whatever. It's going to find a way to get its needs met one way or the other. And usually, based on how most people are programmed, particularly in the West, I would say it's within that high drive, success, productivity, right? Human performance equals my well-being. And so most of us, we're wired to go, 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 or do, 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 do. And it might not be through a healthy movement way, but we're still burning ourselves out. And a lot of times what our body is screaming for is connecting back into that place of recovery. And breath is recovery, right? But I agree 100%, because when I'm working with clients, I'm like, yes, there's box breathing and there's this breathing, and we could Google it, and there's a million things, and I could teach certain specific ones that are better for this or better for that. But in reality, I'm like, all I want you to do is stop and pay attention to the fact that you are breathing, and remind yourself that it is important to breathe, and notice the in-breath and notice the out-breath, because we don't need to make it fancy. We don't need to make it special. You just need to remember that you do absolutely know how to breathe, but paying attention to that breath is where so much beneficial work happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. Beautiful. Now, you have one of the things I know that you do, looking at some of your work, is taking people outside. Is that right? Out into the
Yes.
forest. So tell us more about how you're bringing this skills training and self-trust and somatic experiences, healing experiences, or what is it that you're bringing to people by taking them out into the forest, into the trees?
Yes. Well, one of my, very special privileges is I happen to live in an area. I live in Central Oregon, and it's just kind of a mecca for all things outdoors. Any different direction that I go, there's a beautiful river. There's, not very far away, I have mossy, ferny forests. I also go in the other direction, and there's a desert sort of landscape with these beautiful old growth juniper trees, sagebrush. There's mountains and cliffs and all of it, right? And so that access is there, which makes it easier for me to have access to do this work. But also from a personal standpoint, I have always found my connectivity to nature, and recognizing that I am not actually a part of nature, that I am nature. Like I am a human animal, and finding that and reconnecting myself is my happy place. Like that's where I plug in. It's going out into the forest. It's literally touching grass, right? Like getting my feet barefoot in the soil, or just walking, down a river path. Even if I'm only a block away from society, just being in that, more of a wild space is soothing to my nervous system. Immediately, I feel myself sort of down regulating again, coming out of this ethers of the thoughts and the doings and the pressures and the worries and the stressors. And I'm really dropping into my nervous system and into my body, and I'm more sensory aware. I'm more in the moment. I'm more mindful in what is happening around me, because I'm looking at the birds and the beautiful colors of greenery or the water or whatever it is. And as I started to recognize how beneficial that was for me, I started to look at that more from a psychology sense of like connecting to that as a healing space. And so one of the things that I love to do with clients is walk and talk sessions, or, almost like a forest bathing, where we'll pick a little spot, we'll meet, and sometimes we move, and sometimes we sit, and sometimes we'll pick up pine cones, and sometimes we'll make mandalas out of sticks, and sometimes we just move through the greenery, and we're talking about other things that aren't necessarily connecting to nature at all. And then sometimes we'll stop, and I'll be like, that's really heavy. Look at that tree. I want you to give that to the tree, because the tree can help you hold space for this, or the rock, or the bush, or, whatever, the flower. There's no one right or wrong way to do it, but it's really about reconnecting to the idea that we are a part of that nature, that we are nature, and that we are connected, and that we have like roots, and that we have, the ways that trees intercommunicate with themselves, and how they can help to, as we breathe out, right, they breathe in, and as they breathe out, we breathe in. And there's that symbiotic relationship that is absolutely happening in nature in a synergistic, harmonious kind of way that is really powerful. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously from a somatic place, it's just moving your body is always, helpful. Get
Right,
out
right.
into the fresh air and into the movement space.
Yeah, and not complicated movements necessarily, right?
Mm-mm.
You're not like
Nope,
hiking
no.
up the mountain to
No.
achieve
The work that I
greatness.
do is super like just literally if we find a park trail or some little forest paths and we might stay on the trail and there'll be lots of people near and around and it's not like we're in the middle of nowhere. And then there's a few little hidden gems that I know where even though we're close to town, it feels like you're in the middle of nowhere, which is really
Mhm.
wonderful. And so then we might walk through this little off path and we might find a little spot and sit, kind of in the dirt or in the moss or, on a rock or on a tree stump or whatever, and just kind of drop in and connect. And we'll do a mindfulness exercise or a somatic exercise or just a noticing what we notice kind of just fun. The work that
Mhm.
I do is always very organic and non-scripted. So we always see where it goes and meeting my clients where they're at and what comes up as like this would be helpful or letting them kind of lead the charge of what they want or what feels good for their body. What doesn't feel good, we're not doing it. So.
Which that to me, that's the place. I mean, I shared that again with the swimming that, well, I'm teaching, there's a specific skill set that people are looking for, but it's really how do I build this trust and embodiment while I'm developing a specific skill set? You're not going into, well, you are going to specific skill sets when we're talking about relationships, but this piece of trust, I think the ability, helping people with the ability to feel into their senses and to have an open-ended experience and be pulled forth perhaps with curiosity. Yeah, is
Curiosity, 100%. I use that word all the time, in terms of the internal dialogues, in terms of our inner workings and what is happening in our origin stories, right? Or core wounds, all of the different, kind of quagmire and messy beautifulness that makes us up as a human. And when we can start to look at that with curiosity rather than judgment, rather than self-criticism, rather without the shame, without the doubt, without the expectation to perform or exist in any certain way, but just the kind of like, oh, that was interesting. I'm noticing that. I'm witnessing that. And I'm being curious about maybe what's coming up there and why. But I'm removing that pressure to feel like I have to compare myself or judge myself or hold myself to some made up arbitrary standard that like says who, based on
mhm,
what? Like, where did that come from that you're telling yourself that? Who says? Right? It's
mhm.
a question of like to kind of shut down so we can go back, shut down the judgment and go back to a place of curiosity rather than expectation.
So then if we're out here in the forest and we've been practicing this becoming aware and dropping down and using connect or sensing into nature, and so we've had practice with this. And the saboteur side of us says, well, what is all this navel gazing going to give me in my practical life?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we kindly answer that? How do we kindly see how this practice shows up in something like your relationship?
Well, if we're talking about external gazing in terms of like we're going to sit in the forest and I'm going to take somebody through a practice where I'm like I want you to notice all the different colored greens or I want you to see how many textures you can become aware of. What sounds are you hearing or what smells are you perceiving, all of the like sensory kind of stuff of mindful practice. That's one application that like how does that help in a real world? Well, because the more we begin to drop in and notice what is happening in our external environment in terms of a nature-based relaxed setting, the more we're going to be able to notice what's happening in our environment in terms of interpersonal. Oh, I noticed that their facial expression changed. I noticed that their body language shifted and they're moving away from me. Oh, I noticed that they were busy doing this or and I can start to recognize different their other people's cues and clues and tells so that I can understand them as better as well as understanding myself better. And then if we take it back to the internal part, it's the same idea of if I'm noticing that my stomach is rumbling and I need to feed myself and I'm practicing giving myself permission, I'm going to be able to show up more effectively in my relationships because when I'm getting a tell of like, oh, they're really pissing me off right now, I'm going to be able to drop in and go, oh, wow, I just was activated in a way or triggered in a way. And I need to drop down and pause into that so that I'm not going into that red zone where now I'm being reactive. You had a question?
Oh, no, I was going to say, so when I see other people's tells, is this now my permission to judge them for their tells or to tell them, I see your tell?
Oh, that's a juicy question. I would say that that information of understanding self and other as you explore your own inner world and as you start to recognize what works for you and what doesn't work for you and what is effective and what is maybe not healthy or maybe toxic or at least not ideal, right? You're going to start to notice it in other people too, of like, ick, I see what they're doing. That doesn't mean that we have to come at it as like oh, I know what you're doing and you're a bad person, or oh, I know what you're doing and I'm better than you because I figured it out. That doesn't help anybody get anywhere. But it's a matter of being the witness to your own process. What really happens that I have seen, at least when I'm working with, the benefit of the doubt of the majority of everybody that I've worked with, and I've even done a lot of domestic violence intervention work. So I've worked with perpetrators of harm. And even in that population, the majority of the people are doing the best they can with what they're given. And the majority of the people out there are not narcissistic monsters that are out there trying to, tear down and hurt other people. Now, it happens more often than we mean to. It happens more often than we recognize. It's not intentional. It's not pathological, like, mwahaha. It's like, oops, I did it again, kind of a behavior pattern. So when you start to recognize your own behavior patterns that are not getting in the way, you're going to obviously start to notice other people's. Oh, I know what that is. But that comes from a place of empathy, because now I'm understanding their struggle. Now, if I see somebody's tell, I'm not judging them for the fact that they have a tell and I know you're bluffing at your poker hand, so to speak, right? It's like, oh wow, maybe they're struggling right now. Well, maybe this isn't about me. Maybe I don't need to take this personally and feel like I have to defend myself and go into counterattack or shut down defensive mode. Maybe I can come at it with a little bit more openness because I'm able to recognize that they're maybe having their own difficult experience. Like whatever is happening within their nervous system is actually causing them to have a hard time. And I can be gentle with them just as I'm learning to be gentle with myself.
Yes, and that's great. And I want to also, because you mentioned domestic violence, to make a distinction, right? That we can come, and it's useful for us to come with this softness to another person in a relationship. And because it's really about this key piece, I think you said there, that, oh, it's not really about me. Their behavior is not really about me. And the freedom in that for the person who might be receiving that behavior is that it's then not up to you to get them to change it, right?
Right.
You're not responsible for it. You can't fix or change it, but you can set boundaries and limitations to protect yourself in whatever way you need to protect.
Absolutely. And see the patterns that are happening and recognize that these are patterns that are not safe, and these are patterns that are not healthy, and these are patterns that are not appropriate, that I don't need to minimize or justify, and still have empathy for the fact of like, wow, that's the little person in them that is acting out in that way, and it really isn't about me, it's about their own wound. But I can still say, no, I'm not going to participate in that, because I'm now more aware of what's going on for me and for them. I'm able to actually keep myself safe. And in terms of the domestic violence, the somatic part of it is so powerful, because the work that I have done in that, and I've done extensive research and created a program, and all of the work that I have done in that area demonstrates this idea that and other statistical evidence sort of backs this up, that not all, but a lot of the power dynamics that happen interpersonally that lead to harm is a tug of war for feeling powerful in the relationship. So whether we're talking about bidirectional abuse, where both parties are perpetrating harm in a secular pattern of, I'm gonna, wear the pants, so to speak, or I'm gonna be the one that's in control, and we go back and forth, or whether it's a very dominant hierarchy of one person is establishing this, they are trying to steal somebody else's power. They are trying to take power so that they feel powerful, so that they feel in control, so that they feel worthy. And that is a futile experience, because you're trying to get it externally and bring it in to your internal person, but it doesn't last. For a moment, you might feel powerful. You won the fight. You dominated the situation, the conversation, and you're like, yeah, I told them. But that doesn't last. And so then you keep in this the continual loop of perpetuating the abuse and the harm, because you're constantly trying to fill a cup that's never going to get filled because there's holes in it. And when we start to do the somatic work, when we start to understand ourselves more and we recognize that it's the hurt child in me that's acting out, or a fear-based response of me not feeling like my needs are met, and so I'm lashing out, or I'm going about trying to get my needs met in unhealthy and ineffective ways, I can start to plug those holes up. I can start to have more agency in my life, and I'm actually creating an internal sense of power over self, or innate personal power, as I like to call it, that now I don't have to go steal power from anybody else. I don't have to go out and prove myself to the world. I don't have to knock everybody else down in the room so that I feel like I'm the golden person. I can be confident and present in my own body and with my own sense of agency, so that I know how to show up, so that I know how to take care of myself, so that I know how to feel safe and feel seen and feel respected, because I won't be treated any other way. And if I'm not treated appropriately, I know how to leave the situation of like, this is not safe and this is not appropriate. You don't get access to me. And I no longer have to be in this power struggle. I've let go of the rope, and I'm now independently confident in myself, but I'm also not self-isolated as in a traumatic response of hyper independence. I'm actually creating that connection, and that, like, for the community and the people that are healthy and that are going to show up in with reciprocity in a healthy relationship, rather than the ones where we're kind of always having this tug of war or this strong arm competition of who has more control over the other.
What I think is so heartwarming in that is also the idea, as you're presenting it, right, it's either person in that situation. And it brings about such compassion. I think we need such compassion for people who, I'm going to use the word victim, I don't know if it's the right word, but who are victims of domestic abuse. So much of society says, why don't they just leave, right? Well, this sense of power, right, of having this somatic experience, and that both people in that relationship need a certain amount of self-autonomy and self-power to be able to set healthy boundaries for themselves, and then therefore the other person. So, and that takes practice, and that takes loving compassion for the self. And Absolutely. It isn't something that we just you force upon with judgment to another person of, in the same way, I've been having this narrative about my pronunciation things for a long, long time. And it takes compassion to build up and to make a change in that, in something that is very simple like that. And then you have something very complex like relationship, to give people loving compassion to build up that self-power.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the emotional entanglement is so significant in all relationships, right? I mean, that is part of relationship, is now we are now emotionally invested in each other. And then when you factor in when there is psychological warfare or really unhealthy emotional investment, and there is that tug of war, and especially when we're dealing with, oftentimes in terms of domestic violence or interpersonal conflict, there's a core wound of I'm not good enough. And so if I don't believe that I am worthy of healthy love, or for many of the perpetrators that I worked with have never even experienced or witnessed what a healthy relationship looks like, didn't see it in their childhood, they weren't raised that way, their parents didn't treat each other in healthy ways, society reinforces so much negative stereotype about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman and husband and wife. And when
schools are very hierarchical, right? Our whole academic.
If you haven't had exposure to what healthy looks like, you're doing the best you can, and you're trying to overcompensate from this core wound of not good enough, and you're going to receive the breadcrumbs that are given, even if they're toxic, even if they're not healthy, or you're going to be trying constantly to scratch your way into some sense of feeling worthwhile and good about yourself as a man, as a woman, as a person, that you don't even recognize how self-defeating you are, or how you're shooting yourself in the foot over and over again, because you're just trying to feel good about yourself, but everything that you're doing is causing a wake of harm to yourself, and particularly to the people that you really truly want to love most, but you just don't actually have the skills or tools to know how, because you don't even truly believe that you're deserving of love necessarily.
Okay, I'm going to start to wrap us in, and what I'd like us to wrap in with, because we went into a very hard subject area. So I'm going to invite in, and perhaps, this is spontaneous, so I don't know if you're up for it, but to take us and the listeners through a little bit of a somatic experience to help bring us down, because some of us might be up in our head or might be slightly activated just by thinking about this intense subject area. It's a powerful subject area. but let's maybe practice bringing ourselves down. Is that something you would be
Love
open?
to. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah. So just a really simple practice. Like this is something that anybody can, I don't want to do anything super fancy or, high detailed because I want it to be able to be easily accessed and used. So a real simple somatic like check-in, right? And we're just going to take a deep breath, maybe situate your body in such a way, like I invite you to wiggle and move and just connect to your breathing, however you breathe in your own time, in your own rhythm. Maybe your eyes are soft or maybe they're closed. And you're just going to breathe for a minute. And as you're breathing, first we're going to notice the in breath. And then we're going to notice the out breath. And then what else do you notice? As you breathe a few cycles, let your attention wander in your body, in your nervous system. Where do you feel held, tense, tight? Where might there be fluttering? Where might there be any kind of icky, sticky gunk? And just attune to that. Pay attention to that for a moment. Take a few more breaths as you're noticing whatever sensation that maybe feels misaligned or out of sorts. And drop into that with a little loving kindness. Just relax your shoulders or unclench your jaw or move your hips in such a way that it feels comfortable. Maybe move your neck or wherever there still might be tension in your shoulders, or maybe you need to stand up and kind of shake it out. Blah, just let it out. If you're feeling some icky bits, I'm just gonna move it through my body so that I'm not holding on to it. And I give myself a minute to just attend to whatever sensation. No force, no pressure, no judgment, just noticing with curiosity. And if I can attend to it right now in this moment, I'm going to attend to it. I'm going to check in and respond appropriately. But I'm going to release fully whatever isn't serving me. I breathe in deeply, filling my body with that life force energy of oxygen. And I let it out, what doesn't serve me. Release it and let it move. And then notice if there's a shift, if there's any release or change. And you kind of bring yourself back out of your body gently in your own time, in your own space. Another big breath. Take in the area around you. Remind yourself where you are. Remind yourself that you are safe, that you were protected, that you were held in this moment, at least right now. I am okay. Everything is okay in this moment.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was great. And I know for myself, I can feel sort of that. I started the podcast by taking a breath before reading our intro. I got into some of my own anxieties and then into a big, deep subject area. And now I'm coming away feeling better. I can understand something, I can learn from something, be curious about it, notice that I got a little activated, and I'm imagining other people did too. And so we can do this simple practice simply because it feels better. I know I can move into the next thing in my life. I'm not going to just move into the next thing that's on my list from that activated space because we took this few moments to do this. And it took, gosh, I don't know, I think maybe you led us for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Not that long, but very powerful, very powerful. I have to drive to appointment next. I'm less likely to get in an accident because my system is calmer now.
Right.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
And this is something that can be wonderful. You can use it in the morning. You can use it as you're driving. You can do it throughout the day sprinkled in. You don't have to like sit in this meditative, like yogi type, hour-long mindfulness practice. It's really just as you need it, drop in and check in with what is happening in your nervous system. Again, that's that idea of like bringing it down from up in the brain, up in that monkey mind as is often used, and back into what is your body telling you that it needs. Reminding your body that you are safe.
Yes, yeah. I'll feel my steering wheel. I won't close my eyes, but I'll feel
don't close your eyes when you're driving.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. This was a really great conversation. I appreciate all the areas that you took us from the forest to relationships and then back into our own bodies again. And tell people where they can find you, because we don't have to just meet you in Central Oregon, although it is beautiful there. I was just there 2 weeks ago listening to Brandy Carlisle.
Oh, wonderful. Yes.
And, so the
work,
find you.
that I do now, I transitioned away from clinical mental health practice. I no longer diagnose, kind of steer myself away from pathologizing my clients. I do often, we like trauma comes up because trauma is a part of, childhood experiences, core wounds, and all of that. But the work that I do is much more present, skill based. And so I'm giving people tangible somatic based skills and tools, and I'm doing it through a coaching model. So there's no diagnosis, there's no insurance involved. So it's only private pay, but I can work nationally. I have clients that I see all over the place just virtually. Obviously, we don't get to do the nature sessions, but I have had clients where we will meet somewhere outside if we have the right technology with, microphones and stuff, and they'll be outside and I'll be outside even though we're meeting virtually, and I can still take them through a similar, nature-based experience and based on where they are in their nature and where I am in my nature.
Nice.
Yeah, and my website is Soulfire Empowerment Coaching. You can find me online. Yeah, and
Great.
other
And
than
we'll have that in the show notes for folks.
great. Yeah.
They can look you there. I'm looking at your plant behind you there and I'm thinking, yeah, we have to keep in mind we don't have to go out far for nature.
No, I mean, I have plants all around me and in my house, so many plants. I bring the nature to me as much as I can.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
very good. All right. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was a wonderful time.